We've been married 45 years. The first 40, unbelievable. The last 5 have been challenging. When you have to feed someone and change them and you know, carry them to the bathroom and do all that kind of stuff every day.
Jay Leno, the man whose laughter once filled America's late nights, now spends his days in a quiet garage in Burbank, California. The comedian who defined a generation of television has grown reflective. After decades of fame built on precision and control, he has finally let the world glimpse the one truth he always guarded: that behind every joke, every monologue, every mile driven in his beloved machines, there was only ever one person who mattered. At 75, Jay Leno has finally admitted that she was the love of his life. This is one story you can't miss. Let's get started. A private man behind the public smile. Jay Leno spends much of his time in his enormous Burbank, California garage, a complex of aircraft hangar-sized buildings that houses one of the world's most valuable private car collections. The space, officially called Jay Leno's Garage, covers roughly 140,000 square feet and holds more than 180 cars and 160 motorcycles, ranging from a 1906 Stanley steamer to a modern McLaren P1. Estimated by automotive analysts and media outlets such as SCMP and CNBC to be worth more than $50 million, the collection represents decades of mechanical curiosity and meticulous care. Here, amid polished chrome and the scent of oil and leather, Leno finds the stillness that fame rarely afforded him. Back in 1972, he used to perform stand-up comedy in Boston clubs by night, saving every dollar and sleeping in his car when necessary to reach the next booking. This was the beginning of something great. By the mid-1970s, he had moved to Los Angeles, performing at the Comedy Store and opening for musicians across the country. His rise was slow but steady, built on relentless touring rather than hype. When The Tonight Show called in 1977 to offer him his first guest appearance, he had already built a reputation for showing up early, working clean, and never missing a show. Through the 1980s, as he guest-hosted for Johnny Carson, Leno earned the industry nickname the hardest-working man in comedy. By his own count and that of his manager, Helen Kushnick, he sometimes did 300 performances a year, sleeping in hotels and airport lounges. That stamina eventually paid off when, after Carson's retirement, he officially became host of The Tonight Show with Jay Leno on May 25, 1992. Under his tenure, the program routinely averaged over 5 million nightly viewers, topping rival Late Show with David Letterman throughout the 1990s. The show earned 4 Primetime Emmy Awards, and in 2014, he received the Mark Twain Prize for American Humor at the Kennedy Center. Despite the fame, he kept his habits simple. He never spent his NBC salary, living instead on the money from stand-up gigs. That frugality, he explained, came from fear of losing everything he'd worked for. Finding Mavis, the love that changed everything. In the winter of 1976, at the iconic The Comedy Store on West Sunset Boulevard, Los Angeles, a young Jay Leno was doing what came naturally, standing in the spotlight, telling jokes, and trying to make sense of the world through laughter. It was in that charged improvisational atmosphere that a woman seated near the front row caught his attention. That woman was Mavis Nicholson in San Francisco, California. At that moment, she was simply an intelligent, independent woman, sharp-minded, witty, and already committed to a path of feminist activism and self-determination. Mavis arrived at the Comedy Store not out of romantic intent, but with professional purpose. She was writing comedy with collaborators and had been encouraged by friends to hang out at the Comedy Store and the Improv to meet people connected to the humor business. In an interview, she later recalled that, "It was in January. I don't remember the day, but at the time I thought, that comedian is gorgeous." As he finished his set, Leno spotted her in the restroom area, unusual for a comedian to do such a thing. Yet he asked, "Are you that girl in front?" According to Mavis's recollection, she said yes. From that moment, the trajectory of their lives began to converge. Mavis Nicholson had steadfast beliefs from early on. She once told her mother, as a young girl, "I'm never going to get married, and I'm never going to have children." She had seen how women's opportunities were stifled by conventional domestic roles. As she said later, "It was a big thing with me, part of my vehement feminism." Yet, meeting Jay Leno disrupted that resolve, not because he changed her mind overnight, but because his presence and character suggested a different possibility. Their early conversations took place in the context of a club backstage, in the parking lot of the Sunset Strip, over coffee or a quick dinner between shows. Leno, in those years, was still grinding, sleeping in motels, driving himself, performing at small clubs, building a reputation. Mavis was a rare interlocutor. She read voraciously, she once said. She consumed more than 10 books a week. She argued with conviction about rights and equality, and she did not shy away from discussing serious issues. Leno described her as voracious, calling her a feminist and all those things, fighting for women's rights, and I always liked that. For her part, Mavis found Leno's steadiness, his work ethic, and his refusal to chase flash or scandal remarkably grounded. Affection did not erupt dramatically. It unfolded slowly and deliberately. In a world where many entertainers were chasing the next high, the next big break, the next headline, what drew Mavis to Jay was his basic, unassuming character. He drove himself to gigs, paid his bills, saved his money, and treated people courteously. Once, during an interview, she said, "With Jay, I began to realize that this was the first time I was ever with someone where I had a perfect, calm sense of having arrived at my destination." Meanwhile, Leno himself has said that when asked why he chose Mavis and why they stayed together, he would say, "I always tell people, marry the person you wish you could be." He meant that he admired in her qualities he aspired to: focus, clarity, independence, and integrity. His proposal exemplified that practical mindset. After they bought a house together, Leno observed that if something happened to him, Mavis would not be covered under his health insurance. His solution: "We might as well get married." He later added wryly, "Not the most romantic." A diamond ring followed, but the insurance plan was the motivator. The date they chose, November 3, 1980, was picked because it was the wedding anniversary of his parents. At the time of their engagement and marriage, Leno's financial situation was modest. He had not yet taken over the helm of The Tonight Show and continued to perform hundreds of stand-up gigs each year. He lived on his comedy earnings, spending very little and saving much. One biographical piece notes he would live off his stand-up earnings in small clubs, sleeping in motels, or sometimes his car. For Mavis, the decision to marry Jay did not signal a departure from her feminist identity. It reflected a choice to align with someone who respected that identity. She continued her activism. She became chair of the Feminist Majority Foundation's campaign to stop gender apartheid in Afghanistan in 1997. She and Leno together donated $100,000 to the cause in 1999. Their wedding took place quietly in Los Angeles, far from tabloids and red carpets. The couple decided early on not to have children. Mavis later explained to The Washington Post in 2014 that she remembered telling her mother at age 7 or 8, "I'm never going to get married or have children." That childhood declaration carried through until the meeting with Leno, and after, the couple reaffirmed their decision. Leno accepted it without question. In the years that followed, Leno's career catapulted and his schedule swelled. Guest hosting for Johnny Carson in the late 1980s, taking over The Tonight Show in 1992, navigating controversies around the job switch, and hosting the show until his 2014 departure. Through it all, Mavis remained his anchor. Her confidence in their relationship and her steadfast belief in her own work provided the bedrock on which his public persona rested. When production delays threatened to keep him away from home, Leno's private choice was always to return to the same person, the same home, the same shared values. A partnership built on understanding and choice. In an industry built on perpetual motion and outward spectacle, Jay Leno and Mavis Leno established a domestic partnership grounded in intentionality and mutual respect rather than glamour or convention. Jay, ever the disciplined comic with a frugality rarely seen in celebrity circles, supported Mavis's autonomy wholeheartedly. He never pressed for a different path, and they built their lives around shared values rather than expectations. The marriage was unusual, not for dramatic bursts of affection or red carpet appearances, but for its consistency and quiet alignment. Their home life, centered in Los Angeles, carried no ostentatious display. Rather than grand gestures or social spectacle, they celebrated the small joys. Weekday dinners cooked at home, random outings to see a stand-up show together, evenings spent reading or watching television. In interviews, he described how he would go home, cook dinner for her, watch TV, and it's okay. Mavis was the grounding force in Jay's life. As Jay's career ascended, he became host of The Tonight Show on May 25, 1992. After years of stand-up and guest hosting, she remained thoughtfully engaged in political activism and philanthropic work, far removed from the Hollywood spotlight. She chaired the Feminist Majority Foundation's campaign to stop gender apartheid in Afghanistan, beginning in 1997, and her work earned her acclaim and respect. While Jay taped nightly shows and produced comedic headlines that reached millions of viewers, their home life remained insulated from the glare of celebrity. This contrast, public persona towering, private life stable, demonstrates a deliberate balance. Jay's role outside the home involved tens of millions of viewers, studio audiences, network contracts, and heavy travel. At home, the value lay in simple rhythms: the dinner table, the car ride home, the routine. Even with his hectic schedule, Jay and Mavis maintained the scaffolding of their marriage with daily rituals of connection, trust, and mutual humor. Journalists note that even after decades together, Jay emphasizes returning home every night, or nearly every night, insisting in a 2025 Parade interview, "I try to be home every night. I went to Puerto Rico for the day, and the plane waited, and I came right back." Their long-standing trust was built across thousands of small decisions. A phone call between shows, a joke shared before bed, a commitment to show up no matter what. A key element of their marriage's durability was understated. Jay once said he always tells younger men, "Marry the person you wish you could be." Financially, Jay's approach to money served as another embodiment of their mutual respect and shared vision of independence. Even as his fame grew and his nightly show commanded millions of viewers and significant earning power, he maintained a notoriously modest lifestyle and avoided large celebrity indulgences. A biographical profile published in the Washington Post described how Jay lived off his stand-up earnings in small clubs, often sleeping in motels or in his car during his early years, a habit that shaped his financial mindset. That hyper-cautious financial posture became a form of devotion, ensuring that their shared security would not be compromised by ego or excess. Mavis, who took on philanthropic work and civil engagement, could pursue her mission without the complication of financial stress or celebrity-driven extravagance. Their domestic life was built on routine rather than spectacle. While Jay often spoke before millions and navigated the shifting world of late-night TV from the 1992 takeover of The Tonight Show through to his departure in February 2014, their private world was composed of breakfasts together, readings in the living room, and simple outings. Mavis seldom appeared at public events, preferring instead to focus on her writing, activism, and the causes she championed. In interviews, Jay described dinners at home and watching TV and it's okay, rather than bustling premieres or parties. The contrast between his public life of high-energy performance and their private life of gentle consistency is stark and intentional. Throughout the years, regardless of Jay's schedule, performing hundreds of shows annually, hosting the nation's leading late-night talk show, dealing with production demands, guest bookings, and ratings pressure. His relationship with Mavis remained rooted in choice and understanding. Their decision not to have children removed a potential conflict of time, attention, and identity that could have pulled them in different directions. Instead, Jay acknowledged that had they had a child, as a comedian, I'd be on the road, and that would have made their lives more complicated. In these ways, their partnership is not about limelight or lavish weddings or public displays. It is about alignment, respect, shared values, and deliberate choice. The home they built was not a backdrop to Jay's career, but the stage for their mutual life work. Mavis's activism and Jay's comedy both finding their place within the orbit of the other. Financial caution, domestic routine, and mutual support each contributed to longevity. Through fame, activism, and adversity. As Jay Leno's star ascended through late-night television and his signature car collection grew into one of the largest in the world, Mavis Leno remained purposefully out of the spotlight, channeling her intellect and conviction into social activism. In 1997, at a time when the Taliban's control over Afghanistan was solidifying and reports of extreme restrictions on women were beginning to emerge, she became chair of the Feminist Majority Foundation's campaign to stop gender apartheid in Afghanistan. Under Taliban rule, Afghan women and girls had been systematically erased from public life, barred from attending school or university, prohibited from working, and forced to wear the all-encompassing burqa in public. Women were not allowed to leave their homes without a male guardian, and even basic medical care was often inaccessible due to bans on male doctors treating female patients. The Taliban's decrees turned daily existence into an open-air prison for half the population. Mavis Leno, who had long identified as a feminist with a deep concern for global human rights, was appalled by the lack of international response. At that time, mainstream Western media covered the Taliban's policies sporadically, and the plight of Afghan women was often overshadowed by geopolitical maneuvering in the region. Her activism was driven by the conviction that silence from powerful nations amounted to complicity. As chair of the campaign, she helped transform what was once a niche human rights issue into a matter of international urgency. Under her leadership, the Feminist Majority Foundation built a U.S. grassroots coalition of roughly 250 women's rights and human rights organizations, mobilizing a national advocacy network that spanned universities, civic groups, and religious communities. They persuaded both the United Nations and the U.S. government to withhold formal recognition of the Taliban regime, ensuring that international legitimacy would not be granted to a government that denied women the right to education, work, or personal freedom. Leno's activism extended beyond policy advocacy to practical reconstruction. In August 2002, following the Taliban's initial collapse after the U.S.-led intervention, she and the foundation launched the Back to School campaign, which included an Adopt a School project to support the reopening of girls' schools across Afghanistan. The campaign organized a petition drive that gathered more than 210,000 signatures. In partnership with Afghan educators and international NGOs, the initiative also raised funds for teacher training, classroom materials, and scholarships for Afghan girls returning to school for the first time in years. The foundation's outreach combined activism with public education in the U.S. They hosted lectures, issued detailed policy briefings, and worked with journalists to keep Afghanistan's gender crisis in the news long after initial headlines faded. Mavis's concern was rooted not only in empathy, but in a lifelong awareness of how systems of power could render women invisible. A sharp-minded advocate with a background steeped in feminist theory and civic engagement, she understood that the subjugation of Afghan women was not an isolated tragedy. Instead, it was part of a global pattern of gender inequality. Her work emphasized that the Taliban's restrictions were not cultural inevitabilities, but deliberate political acts designed to control and silence. Speaking at conferences and in media interviews, she often reminded audiences that before the Taliban's rise in 1996, Afghanistan had a generation of educated women, doctors, lawyers, and professors, whose contributions had been erased almost overnight. For Mavis, restoring those lost futures became a personal mission. While Jay Leno continued his nightly television duties, hosting The Tonight Show from 1992 to 2009, reaching millions of viewers and maintaining one of the most stable careers in American entertainment, Mavis quietly pursued a different kind of legacy. She rarely attended industry events and refused to exploit her husband's fame to advance her causes, insisting instead that the work stand on its own merits. Yet Jay's moral and financial backing of her activism was unwavering. He frequently donated to the Feminist Majority Foundation, helped fund Afghan women's scholarship programs, and offered logistical support for benefit events. Their partnership, though understated, became a model of mutual respect. She valued his humor and steadiness. He admired her intellect and conviction. The contrast between their public and private worlds was striking. As Jay's career revolved around punchlines, ratings, and network schedules, Mavis's days were filled with correspondence from activists, policy briefings, and the slow, demanding labor of global advocacy. She had little interest in Hollywood and often joked that she was the one woman in Los Angeles who doesn't care about show business. Her world was instead defined by causes such as reproductive rights, gender equity, and international justice, and by a refusal to let fame soften her convictions. Under her leadership, the Feminist Majority Foundation's Afghanistan campaign became one of the longest-running and most influential gender-focused advocacy programs in U.S. civil society. Its materials were cited by congressional representatives and international agencies, and its work helped lay the groundwork for post-2001 reconstruction efforts that saw millions of Afghan girls return to school. By 2005, UNICEF estimated that over 2.5 million Afghan girls were once again enrolled in primary education, a figure unthinkable under Taliban rule just a decade earlier. Mavis Leno's insistence on sustained attention was part of what made those numbers possible. Her involvement also carried personal risk. Critics accused Western feminists of being used to justify military intervention, while others dismissed women's rights as secondary to security concerns. Mavis continued her advocacy even as the media cycle moved on, keeping the focus on Afghan women's voices rather than U.S. foreign policy. She argued that lasting change would depend on education, local leadership, and the protection of civil society, not merely regime change. Through all this, she maintained her characteristic privacy. The Lenos' home in Los Angeles remained a refuge from both celebrity and controversy, filled not with Hollywood visitors, but with policy reports, correspondence from Afghan women's organizations, and stacks of news clippings. Jay often said that his wife's work grounded him. While he spent his life telling jokes, she spent hers trying to make the world fairer. By the early 2010s, Mavis's role within the Feminist Majority Foundation had made her one of the most respected, if least publicized, figures in global feminist activism. Though she declined most interviews, her colleagues consistently described her as rigorous, compassionate, and deeply informed. Even as her husband's career wound down, her influence within advocacy networks remained significant. In a world accustomed to celebrity activism as a branding exercise, Mavis Leno's work stood apart. It was neither glamorous nor performative, and it rarely made headlines. But for the women and girls of Afghanistan, and for those who believed in the power of steady, principle-driven engagement, her efforts marked a rare example of moral clarity sustained over decades. Meanwhile, Jay Leno's role in supporting her work, both morally and financially, reflects the respect and equality at the heart of their partnership. According to press accounts, the couple donated at least $100,000 to the Feminist Majority campaign in the late 1990s. At the same time that Jay was navigating the demanding world of late-night television, as host of The Tonight Show beginning on May 25, 1992, clocking millions of viewers nightly, and later branching into his Car and Mechanics series, his support for Mavis's activism meant his public persona and private values aligned. That rare stability in his personal life stands out in an industry notorious for divorce, scandal, and upheaval. From Johnny Carson's 4 marriages and David Letterman's public infidelity scandal to the serial breakups and fleeting unions that mark Hollywood's social fabric. Against that backdrop, Jay and Mavis Leno's quiet, enduring marriage of more than 40 years remains an anomaly. Love as a lifetime's work. In the years since stepping away from The Tonight Show in February 2014, Jay Leno's life has narrowed by choice rather than necessity. He rises early at his home in Burbank, California, the same city that long hosted his studio, and drives to his famed Big Dog garage, where over 180 automobiles and nearly 170 motorcycles are meticulously kept in running order. The facility, covering several warehouses near Hollywood Burbank Airport, has become both workshop and refuge. There, he tends to engines with the same patience that now defines his life with Mavis, his wife of more than 4 decades. At 75, Leno still works with his hands daily, oil-streaked and focused. The man who once spoke to America every night, now content to restore what time wears down. In the years following his television exit, public sightings have become sparse. He still performs roughly 200 stand-up shows a year. Yet the energy that once propelled him from city to city has softened into routine. Those who know him, friends from the comedy circuit, former producers and fellow mechanics, describe a man whose priorities have shifted. Colleagues at the Comedy and Magic Club in Hermosa Beach, where he has performed most Sunday nights since the late 1970s, often note that he still shows up with the same punctuality and preparation as ever. But now, they say, he leaves soon after his set ends, heading straight home to check on Mavis. Many of his peers, including Johnny Carson, David Letterman, and contemporary talk hosts, spent decades balancing fame with fragile private lives. Yet for Jay, the meaning of success has evolved into something quieter and more durable. He has often said that he never spent his Tonight Show salary, living only off his income from stand-up gigs, and has no children to divide his estate. His frugality allows him to focus entirely on Mavis's care. In interviews since 2024, he has said that fame, wealth, and even laughter pale beside the constancy of true partnership. Those who knew him during his peak remember how often he described marriage as not something you fall into, but something you build every day. The symbolism of his garage seems almost deliberate. For Leno, machines have always represented time and endurance. Each vintage car he restores demands the same methodical attention that love requires. Patience, precision, repetition. In both mechanics, marriage, there are no shortcuts. What rusts must be repaired. What fails must be rebuilt. Friends recall that even after his 2022 garage fire, when he suffered third-degree burns to his face, chest, and hands, Leno returned to the same workshop only weeks later, his bandages visible, but his resolve intact. That space, scarred yet functional, mirrored the quiet resilience of his marriage. A shared life tested, repaired, and preserved through effort rather than spectacle. Since Mavis's diagnosis with dementia, confirmed in court documents from January 2024, their daily rhythm has slowed further. Jay manages her medical appointments, oversees household finances, and makes sure she remains comfortable in their Los Angeles home. Friends describe his presence as constant but unobtrusive, attentive to details others might overlook, her favorite breakfast, the playlists she once loved. the soft lighting she preferred when reading. In court filings that spring, he sought conservatorship not as an act of control, but of stewardship, stating he wanted to provide for her ongoing care and estate management should he become incapacitated before her. When Judge Brenda Penny granted the petition on April 9, 2024, she called his plan thoughtful, protective, and reflective of genuine love. Public reaction to those hearings reframed Jay Leno in the American imagination. To generations who had known him as the quick-talking, chin-jutting comedian of late night, the image of an aging husband patiently caring for his wife added a new dimension. The performer who once delivered punchlines to millions was now photographed holding Mavis's hand on slow afternoon walks, his expression composed and tender. He told People magazine that summer, "I like taking care of her. This is what love is." Those who visit the garage today describe a man content within smaller horizons. He still greets mechanics, still adjusts carburetors, still insists on polishing brass fittings himself. But between jokes about fuel systems or steam pressure, he speaks most often of Mavis. One longtime friend recalled him saying that marriage, like machinery, only lasts if you listen to it. The analogy is apt. Both depend on attention, rhythm, and repair. Where once he memorized jokes, he now memorizes doctor's notes. Where he once sought applause, he now seeks calm. The spotlight that once followed him across America has narrowed to the pool of lamplight over his living room chair. Visitors describe that room, walls lined with framed black and white photographs, a few Emmy Awards tucked on a shelf, the faint hum of a distant car engine from outside. On a table sits a photo of Jay and Mavis on their wedding day, November 3, 1980. She in a simple ivory dress, he in a dark suit, both smiling without pretense. He often lingers on that image before bed, running a finger across the glass as if polishing chrome. To him, it represents continuity. Even in the face of loss, Jay's humor persists. At a charity event in late 2024, when asked about retirement, he quipped, "I've been retired 3 times, but Mavis still lets me go to work." The laughter that followed was tinged with recognition. Behind the joke lies the understanding that love, like comedy, is both repetition and timing. The man who once measured success in Nielsen ratings now measures it in moments of calm beside the woman who defined his world. Love, for him, has become a lifetime's work, built piece by piece, day after day, like the restoration of an old machine whose worth lies not in how fast it runs, but in how faithfully it endures. Well, that's it for now. Thanks for watching. Did you like this video? If you did, please consider liking, dropping a comment, and hitting the subscribe button so that you don't miss out on our new uploads. Also, don't miss this video you see on your screen right now. It's truly unbelievable.